Hi, my name's Rob, and thought I might do a quick review on my new Mark 7 Evolution press. Uh, Big reason I got this thing is it's got 10 stations, so it'll do a powder check and a bullet drop. Uh, my experience is primarily with the Dillon 650. I've had a Dillon 650 for, here it is over here without the case feeder. But I've had that thing for about 18 years and it's been a great press. I mean, bang for the buck, it's hard to go wrong with the 650. I guess now they call it the 750. But life was good. I really liked the 650. I was perfectly happy. And then my buddy Mike told me, you got to get a bullet feeder. A bullet feeder will, it'll change your life. It'll rock your world. And he's kind of like the Borg. Resistance is futile. He's very persuasive. So anyway, I got a bullet feeder and rigged it up on the 650, and it was life altering. I mean, it kind of reminded me of first time you got a TV with a remote control or a garage door opener. There's no going back. And once you get a bullet feeder, I don't think there's any going back. But on the 650, the bullet feeder die replaces the powder check. So I hooked up this endoscope camera to the press so that I could keep an eye, visually keep an eye on the powder level. And that was working out okay, except I had an iPad set up right behind the press, and the whole time you're loading, you're watching the case kind of go up and down, in and out of focus, and it I didn't do well with that. It was giving me a headache. So I started looking at new presses. Yeah, I looked at the Dillon 1100, and that's kind of the same as the 650 or 750. It doesn't have the capacity to have a bullet drop and a powder check. So, I mean, you could if you use a combination seeding and crimping die, but I like to have separate seeding and crimping dies. So anyway, I'm looking around. I'd been kind of keeping an eye on that Evolution press for a while, and then I saw Gavin Gear, the Ultimate Reloader video on this thing, and he takes it out of the box, puts it all together, and then in no time flat, he's just cranking out the ammo like there's no tomorrow, making piles of ammo. No problem whatsoever. Well, that was not my experience. I had a bit more difficulty than that. This thing it's kind of different, and it has some quirks. And I thought I would kind of go over my experience getting this thing running, and maybe save someone else some grief and frustration. So yeah, I'm not trying to build a reloader channel or anything. This will probably be a one-off thing. But let me tell you what I found. I got the thing together, and assembly is no problem. I mean, it's a beautiful quality machine. It all goes together nicely. I've got it bolted to a friend of mine gave me this piece of steel. It's a 1/2 inch thick piece of steel, and I kind of beveled, cut off the corners. It makes it real easy to get around behind it, I can get to the back of the press real easy, and it's solid as a rock. But what I found, I mean, right off the bat, after I got it together, before I even started installing the dies, I'm cycling the press, and I notice, the handle goes down, and it comes up about halfway, and then you meet some resistance. And what that resistance is it's right about there, but the index pawl starts indexing the shell plate, and that is a little different than my experience with the Dillon, in that you've got to kind of push it. It's like you're pushing the shell plate around to index it, and there's some resistance there. And when I first got this thing set up, I thought, oh man, that's having to push on that thing. Something's wrong. That's not right. Feels like it's binding. Feels like something's wrong. It's not loose and free like it should be. So off I go, kind of investigating the ordeal, and I call Mark 7 customer support, and I describe what I'm feeling, and I just want to know, is this normal, or do I have a problem? And I didn't get a real definitive answer. What I was told is it's kind of the same as a Dillon. To adjust the shell plate, I was told, you just twist it down until it stops, and then back it off just a little bit. And that's where I discovered there's a big difference. In a Dillon, it's just like you tighten down that bolt, or the big nut against the shell plate, and it's just loose, and then when you come to the stops, it's like metal on metal contact, and just clunk, it bottoms out. There's no doubt, that's the limit. That's where it's going. And then you back off maybe like a 1/16 of a turn or an 1/8 of a turn, and lock it down, and you're good to go. But that's not the way this thing works. The shell plate, instead of just riding on a metal surface, you've got metal on metal there. It rides on a spring. There's this wavy kind of clip thing, and you can see, if you go online and look at the parts breakdown for the machine, you'll see underneath the big collet nut, there's this clip. It's a big, I'll call it a spring clip, but essentially the shell plate's riding on a spring. So, and this, until I kind of understood what was going on, this caused me all kinds of headaches, because you tighten this thing down, and you can tighten it down to where the shell plate is actually making contact with the base. And I don't know if that's the proper terminology, but this part of the press directly underneath the shell plate, for purposes of explanation, I'm just going to call it the base. Maybe this is actually the base. I don't know. But you can tighten this down finger tight until this makes contact with the base, and then back it off just a little bit, and it'll work. Only when you cycle the press and you get to here and you're pushing, with it that tight, it gets progressively harder. It feels more and more like something's binding up, and it gets harder and harder to push the tighter you get it. And but if you loosen it up, if you've got this nut too loose, then the shell plate, it comes up under that spring tension, and then as the dies are working, the shell plate kind of woggles around, and I was getting all kinds of inconsistencies and variations. And you wind up, as you're trying to set the dies, the shell plate's actually moving around. It tilts and it wobbles. If you've got this too loose, it's just riding on a spring. There's no hard contact there. And I had all kinds of trouble. I mean, I had variations. If you don't expand the die properly, I shouldn't say properly, but you expand the die, and then the powder measure has to come down and make contact with that and drop the powder, and you adjust that so that the barrel thing comes clear up to the top. And what I was finding, I was adjusting the expansion dies and the sizing die, and whenever you change something, it's like everything else changes. And this was either jamming up there too tight and really excessively belling the case mouth, or it wasn't going up all the way. And also, my bullet feeder wasn't working properly. My bullet seating depths were all over the place. I mean, I was getting 30 thousandths variance in bullet seating depth. I mean, and you can just look at the bullets and see that. And I was also getting variance in the depth of the primer depth. So if that shell plate is not tight, all you do is go around and around in a circle adjusting dies, and you're never going to get it, you're never going to get it really dialed in. And that caused me a lot of frustration. So anyway, I actually, customer support, I mean, they're really very nice, and they were, quite responsive, but I don't know, for some reason they didn't understand what I was talking about. And so anyway, I actually reached out to Gavin Gear, the Ultimate Reloader, to see what his experience was, because he seemed to get that thing together and it was just running like clockwork, just like a Swiss watch. And so I wrote up an email kind of describing my question. I wanted to know, is this friction or drag that I'm feeling, is that normal? And should I just tighten that thing down to where it's moving, the shell plate doesn't wiggle or wobble, and just, is that much drag? Is that normal? But anyway, I didn't get a response from Gavin Gear, which, he's big time now. He's the ultimate reloader. So, it doesn't surprise me that he didn't have time for me. I'm an everyday reloader, just another chucklehead behind the trigger, and he's the ultimate reloader. But anyway, I did get a hold of someone on Mark 7's website. They showed their team shooters, and there's a guy, and they've got their email addresses. So I shot an email off to Bill Drummond, who's one of the Mark 7 team shooters. Asked him if he had experience with the manual version of the Evolution press, and that guy was very helpful. He, we corresponded back and forth. He answered my questions, got me on the right track. So, I'm grateful to Bill Drummond. That guy's a class act. He really, took the time to make sure I was, going to be successful with this thing, and I really appreciate that. So, anyway, what I wound up doing to get this thing running well, you're kind of caught between, two options. Do you tighten this thing down, basically, as tight as you can with your fingers, and then it's making contact with the base? Well, you back it off a little bit. And I used shims of paper in there to make sure I wasn't actually contacting the base. And then just put up with that drag, that resistance when you're pushing forward, or you loosen it off a bit more, and then you've got the shell plate wobbling around. So I don't know. I mulled over this and kind of with Bill's help came up with another idea, and that was what I did initially, which I don't think I recommend because it's a lot of work. But I took the tool head off, I took the nut off, the shell plate off, and I removed that spring that goes around the ram, and I removed there's an index ball in here. I removed that. Got to get a magnet and suck that out with the spring, and then I put the shell plate on and put the big collet nut back on, and then it's like a Dillon. You can tighten that down until, wham, it makes contact. There's no doubt where the limit is, boom. And I put the little shims of paper in there because I didn't want it to make really solid contact and scrape up the anodizing and so on. So I kind of shimmed it with paper, and then I would tighten the nut down until you could feel it was grabbing the paper. And then when you cycle the press like that, you got to have it a little bit loose. So I loosened it up just a hair, just to where it would index without rubbing. And then what I did with that shell plate all the way down there, almost making contact here, what I did is I ran the dies down, and this is probably a little unorthodox, but and it's a little tricky, but it works for this press. It's worked for me. But so I had this thing all the way down. I ran the tool head down, and then I turned in these dies. That is the sizing decapping die. I've got a Lyman Type M expansion die, and I've got a Redding expansion die, and my powder check die, my bullet seating die, and my crimping die. I ran all those down, just twisted them down until they touched. I didn't want to make heavy contact, just until they touched, and then stop. And then I would kind of tighten up the lock rings, just finger tight, and then just leave it at that. So I've got all these dies, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 dies, all making contact with the shell plate. Light contact, but they're all right there. And then I raised the tool head back up. Then I put an empty cartridge in all the holes, and ran it down again just to make sure, when I do the final snugging on all the lock rings on the dies, that everything's in alignment. So did that, locked everything down, and then I took it all apart again, took the tool head off, took the shell plate off, and then put it back together with the index ball and the spring, and then at that point, because you've got at that point where you tighten down, how much you tighten down the big collet nut is not so critical, because what it's doing, you don't want that shell plate to be tilting or wobbling as the dies are down doing their job. You want that to be very consistent. So the way I've got it set up is, you tighten it down till it's pretty tight, and you can back it off. You can back it off quite a ways so that the resistance here is not nearly as heavy. And what you're doing when you go down, those dies are pushing on the shell plate, and they push it to where it's compressing that spring, and the shell plate is very, very close. if not making contact with the base. So, and it's going to do that every time. So everything is consistent. I'm getting very consistent bullet seating depths. The expansion and the powder measure is all very consistent. So the shell plate kind of gets pushed down to the same spot every time, by the dies. And then when you lift it back up, you're not pushing down, so the shell plate can kind of rise back up. And I don't think it's critical at all how far it comes up. You can have this thing pretty loose. And then, because it's looser, this resistance is minimal. And it indexes, no problem. Ready for the next go around. So now, it's very smooth. That resistance is still there, but it's not bad. It doesn't feel like something's going to break or something's coming up. And kind of since we got that figured out, life is good. Let me make sure I'm covering everything here. Okay. Anyway, the dies I'm using, when I process my brass, I resize it. I get it all resized. So I'm just using a Lee universal decapping die, so it's not really resizing at this point. I got a Dillon swaging backup, and I haven't really played with this yet. It's just in there. Like I said, a Type M and a Redding expansion die. And this is nice having two expansion dies, because you kind of have one does half the work, and then another die that it does everything. It does all the expansion, but it doesn't really flare the case mouth. So you're kind of doing the case expansion, and you need a certain kind of case expansion for the bullet feeder, for that bullet to fit in there snugly and not fall out. So I'm doing that in 2 stages, and that keeps it from sticking. If you've on my 650, it was just done with on the powder measure is where it does the expansion, and you go down and expand, and then it can kind of stick. I wound up polishing the dickens out of the powder funnels so it didn't stick so much, but everything has a tendency to kind of stick at the bottom. But when you do it in 2 stages, no real sticking. It's not noticeable. And then I've got the powder measure adjusted such that it comes down, and you want it to make full contact. So this barrel goes right up to the top, right to its limit. And I found to do that, what you want is, like I said, these 2 expansion dies, they expand it, but they don't bell the case mouth. And then I let the powder measure do just a very slight belling on the case mouth, just very subtle, but that ensures that this thing rotates to the top every time. And then I've got a powder check, and I've got my old tried and true Dillon powder check in here, and that's working out pretty good. When I got the press, I bought the Double Alpha Academy powder check, and it's a pretty nice unit, but a problem with it is the little plunger that goes down and sits on top of the powder. I don't know if it's static. I've cleaned that thing with carburetor cleaner and all kinds of things, but it somehow that thing wants to grab onto the powder. And actually, Gavin Gear mentioned this in his video. It grabs the powder, it pulls it up, and it spills it all over. So this thing was making a mess. And it's a shame, because it's such a nice looking unit, but that little plunger wants to grab onto the powder. And the Dillon's got a brass plunger, and it doesn't hang on to anything. It just goes down, and it's very clean. So I had to do a little, I probably can't see it back here, but I've got a little wooden stick there. It's very conveniently a 1/4 20 screw hole in the back here. and I've just got a stick that actually pushes that powder measure thing up. If you're familiar with the Dillon powder measure, you'll know what I'm talking about. But it's a very easy, right now I've got a stick in there. I'll probably make that look a little more elegant down the road here, but it works. So anyway, that's kind of my die. And then I got, a Reading kind of micrometer seating, bullet seating die, and then crimping die. And just can't go wrong with those things. So anyway, all was good, except probably my biggest problem with this this unit is it came, unbeknownst to me, it was delivered with a Hornady case feeder. I've actually still got the I've got the thing here. It's what you get with the Evolution press, and it's very much like a Dillon case feeder, only it doesn't really work. And they send it to you with this ramp and the spring flipper, and it requires all kinds of fiddling, and I had great difficulty getting it to work at all. Anyway, I complained about that case feeder to customer support at Mark 7, and they were very sympathetic, and they were actually quite attentive to my complaints and quite responsive. But they wrote up some documentation on how to set it up, and they actually made a video of how to set it up and demonstrate that if you put the spring just so, it'll work fine. But they showed it working fine for like 15 seconds or something, and that's anyway. I could not get that thing to work reliably. I played with every combination of that little spring flipper and ramp, and I had clamps and duct tape because that little 3D printed ramp, you slip that over there. Well, the cases just come along and push it out of the way. It doesn't. You've got to have some way to retain that thing, and so I had all kinds of sticks and clamps and tape, and then also big problem was, okay, you can get the cases falling out of the case feeder just fine. They'll fall through this case feeder plate, and they fall into the funnel in the proper orientation, and then 9mm small enough on this funnel to bang around and flip upside down before it actually goes down. So I was getting quite a few. I mean, like 1 out of 25 cases that were upside down. And finally, hold on a second. Finally, what I did is I took, if you can see this, it's a little powder funnel, and I cut it down. I cut it down so that it would fit inside the case feeder funnel, and made it smaller. And that worked out great. That stopped the shells from flipping over. And this was not an original idea. In the first case feeder I had from Dillon, it had the same kind of a thing. It had a little insert that you put in there for 9mm to not give the cases so much room to knock around and maybe flip upside down. They just put a smaller kind of funnel insert in there, and that worked out. But anyway, I don't know. There's probably a lot of people out there with Hornady case feeders that just think they're great and they work fine, but I like to think I'm a clever guy and I can get things to work, but I just had too many headaches from that case feeder. And so Yeah, maybe I'm an idiot, but I know how to get a Dillon case feeder working. You know, you just plug it in and turn it on, and it just works. So let me see here. So as you can see, I've kind of refitted this thing to use a Dillon case feeder, and it actually, you know, I thought it was going to be an ordeal to kind of get a Dillon to fit on here, but amazingly, it was really easy. What I did at first was, you know, the Mark 7 comes with this aluminum piece that joins these tubes, and I took that out and I put a chunk of broomstick in there so this could turn, the upper part could turn, and so I slapped my Dillon, you know, from my 650, I slapped the Dillon case feeder on here and just turned it, and you know, the whole thing, the end of this that pushes up in the Hornady case feeder is the same diameter as a Dillon, you know, that the acrylic tube that snaps into place here. So that just pops right in, just like it was, you know, like that's where it's supposed to go. And then I actually got it coming straight down into the original Mark 7 acrylic tube here, and it just works. You know, it works. I mean, I've used this case feeder with all kinds of different calibers. I won't list them, but you know, a lot, and you know, rifle and pistol, and it just works. You know, it's not perfection. You know, once in a great while it, you know, it'll jam up or something, but you know, for the most part, compared to all the headaches I had with the Hornady, this thing is wonderful. So now I've got it on there, and life is good. So it can be done. And you'll also notice, you know, like I said, I've got my Dillon powder check on there. That worked out pretty good. And the primer alarm, you know, you'll notice I've got the Dillon primer alarm thing on there, and I didn't do that just to put more blue on the press, but the Mark 7, I mean, it's a wonderful unit. You know, it's looks like it's finely CNC'd machined. You know, the primer follower is just a beautiful unit. You know, it's got some weight to it, and you know, it actually it seemed to work okay, but I had trouble hearing that. It's a real high pitch. And for my ears, it's pretty quiet, that beep when it actually turns on. And I'm, you know, I'm older, sadly, and my hearing is starting to go. And that high pitched beep out of that primer alarm, you know, with the noise going on, just the normal noise you're making as you're pumping out ammo, I didn't hear it all the time. A couple times I ran out of primers, and but lo and behold, the thread on the end of the primer tube here is the same as on a Dillon. So I just put on that thing on the end, put my Dillon on there, and that thing's, you know, it's much louder and much more obnoxious. So when you run out of primers, you know, with this thing, you know it. And it's much more within my frequency range that I can hear. So anyway, that's about it. You know, oh, I got another point to make, something that I'm not happy with. If you look on the If you look in the manual, you know, it's kind of a minimalist user manual, but on page 25, they got a picture here of, you know, lubrication points, maintenance, recommended maintenance and lubrication points. And, most of them make sense. You got a pin here, you got to grease that. You got this thing you got to grease once in a while, no problem. The ram, Molykote grease, yeah, that makes sense. Primer rocker, no problem. But then